Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Qualifying is over at the Singapore Grand Prix. Leclerc on pole position, Hamilton just 500ths of a second off his first pole of the year. But the big story being Max Verstappen, championship leader, on course to smash out the pole position time and secure P1 for tomorrow's race, was asked to abort the lap by his team for seemingly having too little fuel in the car. Verstappen understandably furious with his team for this mistake. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. Thanks also for 9,000 subscribers. I know I owe you guys a lot of videos. I was away the last few days and this is my third channel, so other things had to take priority a little bit because I was on holiday and stuff. But we're back in business now, so many more videos over the coming days, and I've got another one if you guys are rather spicy in just a few hours time. Here we go. It was raining early on in the day in Singapore for free practice 3. Finally they got everything underway, and yes, well, let's just fast forward into Q1 because the track here was still drying and people did wonder, okay, what is the point where the slick tyres, the soft tyres are going to be most viable? Because there were certain sections where it was very wet indeed, and slicks would have just lost so much time in those sections that the Inters were the quicker tyre for honestly longer than I expected. The Mercedes got out there first, usually a car that struggles with tyre warm-up, so they probably weren't so happy that way it was going, right, keeping on drying up, because they generally struggle to fire up their soft, and that's what Hamilton actually said for his final lap of the session, that the tyres weren't quite where he needed them to be. But the Inters were going on first of all. In Q1, it's Bottas, Riccardo, Ocon, Albon, Latifi out. The Williams is just terrible around anything that are slow corners, so that's not exactly a surprise. Bottas, though, out-qualified in these kind of wet conditions by Guanyu yet again. Very impressive work, honestly, from Zhou to keep delivering these performances, out-qualifying Bottas again. Riccardo, honestly, again, it's a Q1 exit. Norris qualified, I think, P5 or P6. We'll see that in a few minutes' time here. But in fairness, for some reason in Q1, the McLaren was terrible, and Riccardo was only 0.3 of a second off Norris, and Norris was actually P15 and just snuck through. So currently it's tough for Riccardo as per usual. Ocon, though, he had some sort of brake issue on his final lap, so that was a big surprise. So interesting, really, the whole battle between McLaren and Alpine. That here the last few races it's been Norris effectively fighting one-handed for McLaren against the Alpines. Now Ocon's given them a helping hand, I suppose, by starting P18 for tomorrow's race. Could have been different if Verstappen had been sent all the way to the back of the grid, which is what they believe might have happened. Now Q2, things were going rather interesting. Hamilton was doing some great laps and showing great pace, where Russell really was struggling out there. Kind of difficult to say why exactly, because he had the pace to some degree in the practice sessions, and I think even in practice too he was third, and Hamilton was like, yeah, I might need to try what Russell's got going on with his setup for, well, how things were going to progress. But as it turned out, Russell was really struggling out there, and his last lap was just too slow, effectively by 0.006 of a second, that we shall see. Some teams, of course, that thought they weren't going to make it tried to bolt on the slick tyres. Vettel gave it a go, and of course makes sense if you're probably not going to make it to Q3. At least give it a go. Turned out, though, the Vettel, he loves it around this circuit, but wasn't going to work out for him. He locked up after, I think, going into turn 7 or turn 8, whichever one it is, and that was the end for his lap. But yeah, George Russell, P11. Big surprise, to be honest. In these conditions, Russell's usually very good. Hamilton has generally had the measure of him in qualifying so far this season, but this was a big surprise, especially given the fact that Russell, of course, is pretty big for the championship as well in terms of P2 in the constructors, and also Russell still fighting really for P2 in the drivers, right? So that was kind of a big shock to see him go out so early alongside the two Aston Martins, Vettel, Schumacher, and Zhou as well, also out of there. He was kind of saying, look, I just didn't really have the pace on the day, was kind of struggling out there. But Hamilton was definitely a very different story for him. He was banging in crazy laps, honestly. There was one lap that he did that was like 2 seconds faster than anyone was doing at the time in the same track conditions, just after he put on the soft, and the track was very quickly getting better throughout Q3. Hamilton at this point was on provisional pole a couple of times, then Alonso was on provisional pole, and then Perez, Leclerc were doing great laps, and then the track got really rather dry, and this is why it's really annoying to me that Stefano Domenicali keeps on pushing this sprint race stuff. These qualifying sessions are so much fun to watch, and sprints, honestly, in my opinion, kind of ruin the weekends, because imagine this was Friday qualifying, Saturday then the grid gets to sort itself out by a short race, and then there's just no overtakes on Sunday, right? So this is why I love qualifying when you get special sessions like this, and the whole pushes for sprint races kind of annoys me. But this was how it stood at this point in time, with of course, the usual suspects up top, but Hamilton was really delivering a good performance, and of course it's going to be difficult for Hamilton up top tomorrow anyway, because he's not going to have necessarily that teammate support. Of course, Russell, every time he's finished a race this season, has been in the top 5, so we'll see if he can maintain that record. But yes, Leclerc puts in a great lap to go P1 with a 1:49.4, and Hamilton was 0.05 of a second off this. Perez as well was only 200ths of a second off this, but Verstappen was absolutely flying. In these new conditions, he was putting in some great laps. And his previous lap to this one, he was having a great lap. He was up on the pole position time, probably would have potentially stuck it on pole. But he made a couple of mistakes going into sector 3, where generally it was wetter, and he thought, okay, look, I'll abort this lap, I'll save a little bit of battery in right to the end of sector 3, and I'll go again for one final flying lap. And he honestly, like, played it to perfection in theory, because he got over the line with about 2 or 3 seconds on the clock. So he was just in time to do another flying lap in the perfect track conditions that he got. And he was absolutely flying at purple sector 1, purple sector 2, and then just coming round the final couple of corners, the team asked him to pull into the pits. He was almost a second up on Leclerc's kind of delta, so he would have, like, for sure been on pole position in either a few tenths or, you know, could have even been more than that, who knows. Yeah, the perfect track condition, was absolutely flying. Yes, again, the car was a bit out of shape going under the bridge, but it still should have been easily good enough for Verstappen to send it into pole. The team goes in his ear and says, no, come into the pit, you can't do this, don't finish the lap, etc, etc. And of course, he was not a happy bunny at all on the radio, and that of course is therefore how it finished. So Verstappen ends up P8 in the end, after not really putting the laps together he wanted. This is the overall grid before we talk about the Verstappen stuff in more depth. Leclerc, Perez, Hamilton, Sainz is the top 4, then Alonso, then Norris, Gasly, Verstappen, Magnussen, Tsunoda. Magnussen, great around here as usual. But yeah, Verstappen P8, big surprise for him in the end to finish here, and he was not, of course, happy, understandably, with his team, right? They told him to abort his final lap. He then backs off and well, is basically just ranting and raving on the radio in classic Verstappen fashion. It's kind of funny, really, because you'd think that because he's got the championship locked up, like, he wouldn't really be too stressed, right? But I mean, here he goes on the radio, like, what's going on, guys? What are you guys doing? And you can understand it, right? Because he's just put together a stellar lap. He's about to stick it on pole position again to just straight up assert dominance, and his team tell him to pull into the pits with seemingly no issue with the car, like, at least manifesting. We didn't really see any problem with the car. I'm sure Verstappen was like, what are these lads playing at? Like, I've just done it all right and then it's gone wrong. Now, if anything, you could argue that mistake on his penultimate lap was really what cost him here, because he was putting loads of laps together. The teams didn't really have time, but especially because Singapore's such a long lap, the teams didn't really have the time to bring their drivers into the pits to put new fuel in the car, so they kind of just had to fuel them for the entire run and hope they could make it to the end, right? Because you want to put the perfect amount of fuel in the car, because if you put too much in, then you're going to be too overweight towards the end. But if you put too few in, too little fuel, then you get this issue. So of course, they don't want to say on the radio what the problem was, but it was shortly after confirmed. But again, this is Verstappen's statements live on air.
Out by 5/100ths of a second on pole, but Lewis Hamilton in the top 3, he will be very glad of that.
What the are you guys saying? Unbelievable, mate. I don't get it. What the is this about?
We'll talk about it in a minute. Explain once you're up.
The more you hear that, the more I think you might just have a...
So understandably, people were theorising here, okay, what was the issue? Was it about fuel? Because it's a very long lap, of course, round Singapore, and if he'd have made it over the line, stuck it on pole position, but then once he gets all the way round that lap and then gets back to the pits again, then they have to be tested. And I believe they've got to have like a litre of fuel left in the car to prove that they're, you know, to effectively fit the rules and make sure it's absolutely fine. Now, Red Bull clearly were not sure he was going to be able to make it. Now, this is pretty interesting, because either they put too little fuel in, of course, there's a lot of variations that go into how much fuel you're burning, and also they don't exactly have the precise number to the milliliter. They have like a rough idea of how much fuel he's got, and they obviously weren't sure that he was going to be able to make it back on time after completing the lap. So they thought, like, it's better just to tell him to abort the lap, bring him into the pits now, and as Yano Watmir very eloquently describes, better to start P8 than P20. If you come in with too little fuel, you get disqualified from qualifying and you go all the way to the back of the grid. So of course they thought, look, let's just solidify the P8. It's not great, but it'll do, rather than risk the fact that he might not quite have enough fuel in the tank and get to P20. So whose fault exactly is this? To some degree, of course, it's Red Bull's, right? Because if they put more fuel in the car, they'd have been fine. You could also argue that Verstappen, though, his mistake on the penultimate lap was what kind of cost him, because if he didn't make that mistake, finishes the lap as he would have done, that might have been enough anyway for pole position. It would have been tight, though, because, of course, that was not the best track conditions. But everyone does seem to believe that if he had have completed that lap as planned, he was going about 2.5 seconds seconds faster than his previous fastest lap, which would have put him, comfortable half a second advantage on Charles Leclerc, maybe into the 1:48, and that could have been good enough, should have been good enough to set him up for pole position for tomorrow. So what does this mean? I don't believe that Verstappen has won from P8 so far. He's won, of course, from various other positions on the grid. Now, he might just be trying to add to his record, right, of starting from a different position and trying to win regardless, but it is going to be difficult round Singapore. In fairness, we said this back at, a few races ago in Budapest, right, when he started P10, and we thought, okay, yeah, probably can't win from there, but turns out wasn't too much of a difficulty. So round Singapore, certainly still possible. Obviously, you can't rule it out. He was flying on that final lap. Definitely in terms of the long run pace, was also the fastest car in practice and the like, but it's going to be far from clear cut because everyone looks pretty competitive out there. Hamilton was looking very good. Even Toto Wolff said that he had an issue towards the end of qualifying with his kind of throttle, or there was some brake or some sort of issue that they had in FP1 with the car in qualifying, so didn't quite have the car under him to really deliver the top lap. This was actually that issue that George Russell was apparently also suffering with, some sort of throttle issue and also the brake issue where he goes off the brakes but the car just keeps wanting to roll forward, so kind of strange stuff. You'd imagine that if they can fix that for tomorrow, the Mercedes looks pretty competitive around here. The Ferrari, of course, always competitive in quali. Tyre deg is going to be a key factor in tomorrow's race, and Verstappen, of course, can very much still win from P8, but definitely an interesting one. Verstappen came out in an interview actually just a few minutes ago as of recording saying, look, it was effectively the team's fault, and things could still get more spicy before tomorrow because Mercedes have actually been summoned to the stewards just now for inaccurate self-scrutineering report or whatever, which effectively is seemingly to do with Hamilton's. I think he's got a nose ring in again or something, and the FIA, once again, after all the other drama going on right now with the Cosco and stuff we'll talk about in a couple of hours, aren't happy about this. So whether they're going to have a penalty for this, I guess we'll see, because I think they technically could. So I guess stay tuned for that one. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.